Sign the papers or get out. My stepfather Richard slammed the management agreement onto the glass table so hard it cracked. When I hesitated, my mother didn't argue. She walked straight to the balcony, held my open laptop over the railing, and dropped it. I watched my entire design portfolio fall 12 stories to the Manhattan pavement. She didn't even look down. She just turned to me, eyes dead cold, and said, "If you won't help this family, you don't live in this house." Before I tell you what my grandmother did when she saw my life's work hit the concrete, drop a comment and let me know. What's the most unreasonable thing a family member has ever demanded from you? I'm reading every single one. I didn't scream. I didn't run down to the street to check on the laptop. I just looked at my mother, waiting for the regret to hit her face. It didn't. She smoothed the front of her silk dress like she had just brushed off a piece of lint, not destroyed 3 years of my work. "Mom," I said, my voice steady. "This is my home. You can't just—" She cut me off with 3 sentences that ended my childhood. "You chose a piece of paper over this family. You don't live here anymore. Get out before I call security." My stepfather, Richard, didn't even pretend to look sad. While I stood there processing the fact that I was homeless, he was already pulling a tape measure out of his pocket. He walked over to the wall separating the living room from my bedroom and tapped it. "We can knock this out," he muttered to himself, not even lowering his voice. "Expand the master suite. Maybe add a wet bar." That was the moment the sadness died and the clarity kicked in. See? They thought I was just Hannah, the 25-year-old hospitality manager who arranged flowers and smiled at guests. They saw a daughter who needed a roof over her head. They didn't see the person who had actually been running the Grand Sterling Hotel for the last 3 years, while Richard was busy playing entrepreneur at casinos in Atlantic City. I walked past them and went to my room. I didn't pack everything. I didn't have time. And honestly, I didn't want it. This penthouse wasn't a home. It was a stage set my mother had curated to project wealth she didn't actually have. I grabbed my passport, my hard drive backup, and the watch my grandmother Eleanor gave me when I graduated. As I zipped my bag, I looked at the photos on my dresser. Me and Mom in Paris. Me and Mom at graduation. Richard wasn't in any of them, but his shadow was. He was the reason the family business accounts were always overdrawn. He was the reason the hotel hadn't turned a profit in 6 quarters. I wasn't holding on to the hotel because I was greedy. I was holding on to it because I knew if Richard got signature authority, the Grand Sterling would be sold for scrap within 6 months to pay off his bookies. I walked back out to the living room. Richard was pouring himself a scotch. My scotch, actually. A bottle I'd bought for a client gift. He raised the glass to me in a mock toast. "Don't worry, kid," he said, that oily corporate smile plastered on his face. "You'll be back in a week when you realize you can't afford a studio in Queens. We'll have the papers ready for you to sign then." I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at my mother, who was now weeping softly on the sofa, playing the victim perfectly for an audience of 1. I just walked out the door and let it slam shut behind me. I stood in the hallway for exactly 10 seconds, breathing in the expensive, sterile air of the Upper East Side. They thought they had broken me. They thought stripping me of my home would make me desperate enough to sign over my legacy. They forgot one thing. I wasn't just the heir to the hotel. I was the one who knew where all the bodies were buried, and I knew exactly where to find the shovel. I woke up on my grandmother's vintage floral sofa, not to the smell of pancakes, but to the sound of a printer churning out documents. The sun was streaming through the brownstone windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the hermetically sealed, air-conditioned silence of the penthouse I'd just been exiled from. Grandma Eleanor didn't offer comfort. She handed me a black coffee and a heavy manila folder. "I didn't give you the Grand Sterling because I thought you needed a hobby," she said, sitting across from me in her silk robe, looking like a retired general. "I gave it to you because Richard was 3 days away from forging my signature to leverage it." I opened the folder. It wasn't a birthday card. It was a forensic autopsy of my stepfather's finances. "I thought he was a developer," I said, flipping through pages of red ink. "He's a gambler," Eleanor corrected. "But not the kind who goes to Vegas. He plays with crypto and high-risk futures. Look at the dates." I traced the lines. 2 months ago, a $500,000 transfer to an offshore account. Last month, a desperate loan from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't trying to manage the hotel to save family legacy. He was trying to drain its liquidity to stop loan sharks from breaking his legs. My phone buzzed on the table. It was my mother. Again. I picked it up. A wall of text stared back at me. "You've destroyed this family. Richard hasn't slept all night. He's only trying to protect you from your own inexperience. How can you be so selfish? Come home, sign the papers, and apologize." I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the urge to fix it, to be the good daughter, to smooth things over so Mom wouldn't be upset. Eleanor reached over and tapped the screen. Stop, she said sharply. You're asking yourself why she can't see it. You think if you just show her these bank statements, she'll wake up and leave him. She would, I said. If she knew he was stealing. She knows, Eleanor said. The words hit me harder than the eviction. She doesn't know the specifics, Eleanor continued, her voice turning clinical. But she knows he's a fraud. And that is exactly why she is attacking you right now. It's the sunk cost fallacy, Hannah. Your mother has invested 5 years, her reputation, her social standing, and her dignity into this marriage. If she admits Richard is a monster, she has to admit she's a fool who let a predator into her bed. I looked at the texts again. Richard is crying. She can't face that reality, Eleanor said. It's too expensive for her ego. So, her brain invents a different story. In her version, Richard is the hero. And you are the ungrateful child causing all the trouble. It's easier to evict her daughter than to evict her delusion. I set the phone down. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My mother wasn't a victim being tricked. She was an accomplice, protecting her investment. So, what do we do? I asked. Eleanor smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. He needs cash flow within 48 hours, or his creditors start calling his house line. He's going to make a move on the hotel today. He thinks because he bullied your mother, he can bully the staff. I stood up and grabbed the black folder. He thinks I'm a 25-year-old girl who's crying in her pillow right now. Exactly, Eleanor said. Let's go show him what a 25-year-old boss looks like. I took a cab straight to the penthouse. I wasn't naive enough to think Richard would let me back in. But I needed my birth certificate, my banking tokens, and the external hard drives he hadn't managed to throw off the balcony. I walked up to the gold-trimmed glass doors of my childhood home and tapped my key fob. Beep. Red light. I tapped it again. Nothing. Frankie, the doorman who had snuck me gummy bears when I was 6, didn't open the door. He came out looking at his shoes, holding a piece of heavy cream stationery. I'm sorry, Miss Hannah, he whispered, like he was at a funeral. The co-op board sent this down 10 minutes ago. Your access is revoked. I snatched the paper. It wasn't an eviction notice from a court. It was an administrative ban from the building's board, due to a security complaint filed by resident Richard Hale regarding threatening behavior. Access for non-resident Hannah Reed is suspended pending review. He hadn't just kicked me out. He had weaponized the building's bylaws to label me a danger to my own neighbors. He wasn't just a squatter. He was a squatter with a rulebook. My phone buzzed in my hand. A FaceTime request. Richard. I swiped answer. The screen filled with noise before I saw his face. The screech of a circular saw. The thud of heavy boots. Then Richard's face appeared, coated in a fine layer of white dust, grinning like a kid with a sledgehammer. You like the open concept? He shouted over the noise. He flipped the camera. My stomach dropped. The living room, the room where my father had taught me to dance, the room with the hand-laid herringbone oak floors from 1920, was a war zone. The floors were being ripped up in jagged strips. The built-in bookshelves were gone, leaving gaping holes in the plaster. That's 100-year-old oak, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. You're destroying it. I'm improving it, Richard yelled, panning the camera to a stack of crates in the corner. Imported Italian marble. Gold-plated fixtures for the master bath. Smart home integration in every wall. I'm sinking $5 million of my own capital into this dump, Hannah. By the time I'm done, this place will be worth double. He flipped the camera back to his face. His eyes were manic. This wasn't renovation. It was territory marking. He was pissing on the walls to prove he owned them. You don't have $5 million, I said coldly. You have debt. I have investors, he snapped, the smile slipping for a fraction of a second. And once I show them the new appraisal on this penthouse, they'll line up to fund the hotel expansion. You see how this works? I spend money to make money. You just hoard it. He walked over to the wall where my height chart was still penciled near the doorframe. He picked up a crowbar. Don't bother calling the cops, he said. I have a signed affidavit from your mother authorizing all renovations. It's a civil matter. And since I'm the one adding value, no judge is going to stop me. He jammed the crowbar into the plaster. Right through the mark for my 10th birthday. Go find a hostel, kid. The adults are working. The screen went black. I stood on the sidewalk, trembling with a rage so pure it felt like it could burn down the city. I pulled up the keypad to dial 911. Vandalism. Destruction of property. I'd have him in cuffs by lunch. A hand covered my phone. It was Grandma Eleanor. She had followed me in her town car. She didn't look angry. She looked at the building, then at the crates of expensive marble being unloaded from a delivery truck, and she smiled. Don't call the police, she said softly. He's gutting our home, Grandma. He's tearing out the floors. I know, she said, watching a delivery man carry a gold-plated sink into the lobby. He is spending millions of dollars he borrowed from dangerous people to install permanent fixtures into a property he doesn't own. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying intelligence. Never interrupt an enemy when he is making a donation, Hannah. Let him build. Let him install every single gold faucet. Let him dig his hole so deep he can never climb out. I looked back at the penthouse window. I didn't see a home anymore. I saw a trap, and Richard was baiting it for himself. 30 minutes later, Richard walked into the lobby of the Grand Sterling like he was the Emperor of Rome returning from a conquest. He wasn't alone. He had brought 2 men in cheap suits who looked less like lawyers and more like bouncers who knew how to bruise a rib without leaving a mark. I wasn't standing at the front desk to stop him. I was in the sub-basement security office with Grandma Eleanor, watching the 4K feed on a wall of monitors. He's heading for the concierge, I said, my hand hovering over the intercom button. On the screen, Richard marched up to Mr. Henderson, our head concierge who had worked at the Sterling for 40 years. I saw Richard slam a piece of paper onto the marble counter. The power of attorney my mother had signed. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Mr. Henderson flinch. Richard pointed a finger in the old man's face, then gestured to the door. He just fired him, I whispered, rage tightening my throat. He just fired Mr. Henderson. I stood up. I'm going up there. I'm having security throw him out. Sit down, Eleanor ordered. Her voice was ice. If you stop him now, he's just an asshole with a permission slip from your mother. If you let him get to the manager's office and log into the Swift terminal, he's a felon committing wire fraud. I sat back down. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Watching a predator tear through the place I loved, abusing the people I considered family, while I did nothing but watch. Richard left the lobby and headed for the executive suite. He kicked the door open. He sat in my chair, the chair Eleanor had bought for me when I took over operations. He put his boots on the desk. He's logging in, I said, watching the screen capture on our secondary monitor. We had flagged the system hours ago. We didn't lock him out. That would have stopped the crime. We created a sandbox, a mirror of the banking system, that looked real but went nowhere. It was a honeypot. Richard typed in the admin password. I knew he had it. My mother had kept it in her diary. Target account. Eleanor read from the screen as Richard's fingers flew across the keyboard. He's not transferring to a business account. I looked at the routing number he entered. It wasn't a contractor. It wasn't a supplier. That's a high-interest lender in New Jersey, I said. He's trying to wire $200,000 to a loan shark. Keep watching, Eleanor said. Richard opened a second window. It was a digital deed repository. He pulled up the file for the penthouse. The document on the screen made the air leave the room. Oh my God, I breathed. It wasn't just a renovation loan. The paperwork showed a second mortgage. And a third. Richard hadn't just spent the money he borrowed. He had leveraged the penthouse to 120% of its market value. He had forged my mother's signature on a high-risk collateral loan 3 months ago. He doesn't own the penthouse, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. He's underwater. If he doesn't make a payment by Friday, the bank forecloses on your mother. It all clicked. The desperation. The aggression. The emerald acquisition strategy. He didn't want to develop the hotel to get rich. He needed to liquidate the hotel to stay out of prison or the bottom of the river. On the monitor, Richard hit execute transfer. The screen flashed. Processing. He leaned back, exhaling a cloud of cigar smoke, thinking he had just saved his life. He didn't know the transfer was going to a dummy server. He didn't know we had just recorded a federal crime. He thinks he's safe, I said. Eleanor stood up and smoothed her skirt. He is about to find out that the only thing more dangerous than a loan shark is a grandmother protecting her legacy. She picked up the microphone for the hotel-wide PA system. Hannah, she said. Go to the lobby. Take your phone. It's time for his close-up. I walked into the lobby just as Richard was mounting the grand staircase like it was a pulpit. He had gathered the entire staff maids, bellhops, the terrified concierge into the atrium. He was red-faced, shouting about new management and trimming the fat, waving my mother's power of attorney like a scepter. This hotel has been bleeding money because of incompetence, he bellowed, pointing a finger at the front desk manager. That ends today. I am taking direct control of all assets. My mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking small and pale, holding her purse like a shield. She knew something was wrong, but she was too deep in the sunken costs to move. I didn't yell. I didn't interrupt him with a speech. I just pulled out my phone, connected it to the lobby's main presentation screen via Bluetooth, and hit go live. Smile, Richard, I said, my voice amplified by the room's acoustics. You're trending. The massive screen behind him flickered to life. It wasn't a slide deck. It was the screen recording from the security office. Richard froze as the screen lit up his login, the failed wire to Vinny's auto body, Newark, his crypto wallet sitting at negative $2.4 million. This is the man trying to fire you, I announced, as thousands tuned in. Not a developer. A gambler who tried to wire payroll to a loan shark. He lunged at me, screaming to shut it off, but security blocked him. Cynthia stared, horrified, as the screen showed her penthouse mortgaged to the brink. The illusion shattered. Her husband was a parasite. Then came the extinction burst. Richard laughed, manic. He pulled out a document and slammed it down. Mechanics lien. $5 million of improvements. Floors, smart systems, plumbing. You want me gone? Pay me back. Otherwise, I'll take every toilet, every tile. He believed he'd won until Eleanor stepped forward. She calmly explained the difference between chattel and fixtures. Anything bolted down becomes part of the building. You didn't create a debt, Richard, I said. You made a donation. To my hotel. He threatened to rip it all out, but that would be felony vandalism. Police were already on the way for wire fraud. One thrown Ming vase sealed the cuffs. As Richard screamed about being the real victim, Cynthia wilted. She begged for help, but I told her the truth. She invited the destruction herself. Security escorted her out. The next morning, I sat alone in the penthouse he tried to steal, surrounded by $5 million of gold fixtures funded with someone else's lies. I called a charity contractor. I'm donating everything. Pick it up by noon. They tried to ruin me. They paid for my renovation instead. They tried to lock me out. They built me a home. If you've watched someone destroy themselves while trying to destroy you, share this. Let them know we're still here.